Hi, I'm Dr. Walter Matwichuk, and I'm here to talk to you about using REBT to combat political intolerance. It's been a long term concern of mine, the degree of political intolerance that I have observed in my fellow citizens here in the United States, whereby people no longer seem to be able to discuss politics. One can only discuss politics with people who agree with them. And I find that to be the most unfortunate set of circumstances that there could exist, because not only do people not discuss the topic, but sometimes when they know people's political views, they then keep away from them. They shut down all forms of communication. Essentially, they reject them. And families have been divided by politics. Friends have been divided by politics. And it's, in my view, a very sorry state when people can't accept that we may very well disagree, even on some important political matters. REBT is both a philosophy and a psychotherapy and aims to help people cultivate attitudes that enable them to live harmoniously with other people and tolerate disagreement. REBT certainly encourages people to think independently, and fallible humans, when they do think independently, will disagree. There's nothing wrong with disagreement. However, the political conflicts that we're seeing today, at least here in the United States, but I don't think we have cornered the market on political intolerance, by no means, is astounding and even leads to violence. It's my hope that people, mental health professionals, and also regular people who use REBT will understand how it can be applied to political intolerance and may begin to model political tolerance, and maybe even talk about how disadvantageous political intolerance is to those who may manifest such intolerance. REBT sees all humans to be prone to dogmatic thinking. Ellis argued that people have preferences, and then we take our strong preferences and transform them. It's almost like we put them in a freezer and make them rigid. And it is when they're rigid that the emotional problems start to happen. As long as we hold flexible attitudes, we will remain tolerant to disagreements. However, as soon as we take our rigid attitudes and escalate them into, when we take our preferences and escalate them into dogmatic attitudes, and then from there we sometimes go and condemn our political components, or we find that we can't bear to engage in any kind of discourse with them. It is then, under these conditions, that interpersonal relationships really break down. So the first point I'd like to make is that political intolerance is just an expression of the dogmatic thinking, the rigid and extreme thinking that REBT takes aim at during the course of psychotherapy. But because it can be used in an educational way, flexible and non-extreme thinking can be advocated and taught to people who aren't in therapy. REBT argues that some people are going to be more inclined to dogmatic thinking, and so some people may have to work harder to see how their dogmatic thinking leads to emotional and behavioral problems. Now, the problem with political intolerance is that people very often don't see how their intolerance hurts them. And so because they don't see how their intolerance hurts them, they're usually not too motivated to relinquish their intolerance and adopt more tolerant political views. Now, the way I've seen political intolerance hurt people certainly is when they lose important relationships with friends and family because of the heightened tension that exists within them and other people. And the question I often wonder about is politics so important that you're willing to lose a friend or a family member because you disagree with them? And hopefully people will see that it's not worth losing your friends and family when you have disagreements, and that it's okay to have disagreements. The other way that a person might get motivated to work on their political intolerance is if they're in the political minority and the existing politics and politicians that implement certain political views are in the majority. And so then the minority might very well huff and puff and complain that they can't get their political agenda through, and then disturb themselves over what they see happening. And so that person might be helped by REBT insofar as they can be shown how to have healthy concern for the political wins and the political implementation that may be occurring. They don't have to be despairing. They don't have to depress themselves. They don't have to rage against their political opponents in the majority, and thereby at least live well in a political environment that they do not find to their liking. But I really believe that REBT is useful in showing people that political intolerance is self-defeating. And so it really is a theory that can be applied to this topic. Now, some of the rigid attitudes and extreme attitudes that people hold when they are politically intolerant include ideas like, well, because I know I'm right, you have to agree with me on certain political issues. And of course, in REBT, we encourage people to step back and challenge certain attitudes and see how their attitudes impact their feelings and behavior. And of course, that attitude can be challenged insofar as even if, let's assume, the person speaking has the quote unquote right political view, whatever that may be, it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree with them. There's no law of the universe that dictates agreement. If there were a law of the universe that dictated agreement, we'd be incapable of warring against each other. So although there may be a law of the universe that dictates the force of gravity, there unfortunately is no law of agreement that dictates political tolerance and flexibility. So when we say or think, I know what is right, you have to agree with me, we are thinking in a very dogmatic way. And REBT would encourage that person to see that they may consider themselves as having the better political point of view, and then keep a strong preference that others agree with them. But certainly it doesn't follow that other people have to. And perhaps the best way to encourage people when you think you have a good political idea is to be a good listener and engage others who disagree with you. Be able to make an argument that supports their side. And if you can argue their side, then it may very well be the case that you understand their political position quite well, and then you can go from there and talk about the political position your opponent is taking. So flexibility is something along the lines of, I really want people to agree with me. I think I have the better idea, but they don't have to. And I'll not upset myself when people don't agree with me. And I may even re-examine my assumption that I have the right point of view. That's debatable. I may have a good point of view or maybe the better point of view, but usually life isn't as simple as to having the right point of view. Another idea that I would consider an extreme idea that leads to unhealthy emotions and self-defeating behavior and political intolerance is, well, if you fail to hold my view, then that means you're an evil person. You're less of a person or an evil person. And this, I think, is a particularly problematic idea. I think that we could challenge this, that political ideas are part of a person. They're just like other ideas a person may have. The idea is not the defining aspect of an individual. And even if they act upon those ideas, REBT would point out that the misguided action that stems from a political idea is certainly a bad idea, a bad behavior, and an antisocial behavior, but it's not reflective of an evil person. It's reflective of a person who's fallible and may have bad parts, one of which is political intolerance. And so we're back to humanity and having a philosophical view that people are fallible, and we could show them unconditional other acceptance, but certainly resist their misguided behaviors, which may stem from their political positions. So thinking that people are evil because they have certain ideas certainly will only fan the flames of anger within you and shut down your ability to engage with them in a meaningful way. Now, another extreme political position that some attitude that will lead to intolerance is, well, if you don't agree with me, I can't stand to even listen to you. Now, in REBT, we call this low frustration tolerance or low discomfort tolerance or attitudes of unbearability. And it's false to the facts. I mean, if you examine the facts, people may not like listening to or like engaging with people who disagree with them politically, but it's certainly not unbearable. I doubt anybody's head will literally explode because they had to listen to a point of view that they politically disagreed with. And so in rational emotive behavior therapy, we encourage people to engage in scientific thinking and see that you can bear to listen to what you may think is political nonsense, and it won't hurt you, it won't kill you. In fact, it's probably a good therapeutic exercise for you to listen to ideas that you disagree with. It'll keep you flexible, and by listening to ideas that you disagree with and telling yourself that you can bear to listen to them, you can withstand the discomfort you may feel listening to them, then you may understand your political opponent better and be better able to persuade them to adopt your point of view. So again, we encourage people to question the idea that they can't bear to listen to political opinions that disagree with them. It might be a healthy attitude, a healthy exercise for you to listen to a cable news station that you believe is opposite to your point of view, or read a newspaper that you believe is opposite to your point of view as a means to engage in the therapeutic exercise of tolerance and cultivating tolerance. And another view that sometimes another attitude that people may hold that will lead to political intolerance is because your reasoning is illogical or biased, then I can't stand it. Now, this is just like the previous idea that I discussed, but it's based on the reasoning that the person, because it's illogical, it becomes suddenly unbearable to listen to, which is false to the facts. You know, I could sit here and tell you that 1 + 7 = 25, You won't die if I continue to show you how 1 + 7 = 25. That's highly illogical reasoning, but it won't kill you. And certainly anybody who listens to illogical political reasoning will not die from listening. And I think sometimes people will say, they just don't think logically, so I can't bear to listen to them. Well, that's false to the facts. You don't like listening to people who you suspect are engaging in illogical thinking, and keep your preference for logical reasoning, but give up your demand that they have to engage in logical thinking as you see logical thinking when it's applied to politics. Now, the next idea is a pretty intolerant idea that I think is really going to be a tough one for a person to challenge, and that is that, well, our country's headed in the wrong direction, and that it would be awful or terrible if certain politicians were elected. It'd be the end of the world. Now, this type of attitude certainly will produce a great deal of anxiety in advance of an election and despair subsequent to an election. And I think that it's really important to recognize that it's an extreme idea. If you look at people who might hold an idea similar to this, people generally just don't die. They can tolerate political presidencies that they disagree with. They may not like those presidencies, but the idea of thinking that, well, it's the end of the world, or it's awful or terrible if a certain politician is elected locally or on a higher level, it's just going to fan the flames of anxiety before the election and despair after it. And REBT would encourage you to see that, it may be very bad if a particular politician were elected. It won't be the end of the world, and it would be in your best interest not to see it as the end of the world. You could see it as bad, but you'll live far better during the term of their government term if you don't jump to the extreme idea that, well, because they're making changes that are important changes to the way things are done, it's awful. Well, it may very well be bad if people in power make certain changes, and you may certainly keep that preference that those changes not be made, and it's bad. But as soon as we start awfulizing, we start getting ourselves anxious, depressed. And again, it doesn't do us much good when we try to engage with other people. And so, in closing, I'd like to mention that Socrates famously said that if you want to change the world, start with yourself. And so, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to first begin by keeping a lookout for your own intolerance, political intolerance. You're human, and every one of us from time to time may become intolerant. And when that happens, don't put yourself down, accept yourself with your intolerance, and then begin to question the attitudes that underpin your tolerance, your intolerance, so that you can begin to develop tolerance and not upset yourself and not be rigid and not be demanding and be better able to deal with people who you disagree with. And then next, you can engage with those people with your political tolerance, with your wish that they agreed with you. And by listening to them with an open mind, you may have a better chance of engaging in persuasion. REBT is not against political activism. It's against dogmatic thinking, anti-scientific thinking, overgeneralized thinking. And so what we're trying to do is get people to adopt scientific attitudes. And scientific attitudes are attitudes that are flexible, consistent with empirical data. And as soon as we start saying that people have to agree with us, we're drifting from the empirical data. How persuasive or how logical or how right you may be, people don't have to agree with you. And that's may be unfortunate if you have good ideas, but it doesn't mean that they have to. You can bear their disagreement, and if you remain in a healthy mindset, you can perhaps persuade them, listen to their arguments, and then persuade them effectively. I would like to mention to you that every Saturday I do a demonstration of this approach applied to all sorts of problems. We've been doing it for a very long time now, weekly, and people from all the world discuss their emotional disturbances, and I show them how to become more flexible in their thinking. And it's free to attend. You may attend at 9 a.m. on Saturdays. I'm in New York, so that's 9 a.m. here in New York. That's at various times across the world. I think the UTC time is 13. You could work off 9 a.m., but in New York and find out what time that is in your neck of the woods. Usually it's 2 p.m. in the UK, 4 p.m. in Bucharest, 6:30 in Delhi, India, and various other times. So I would hope you would join us. It's free to attend, but you have to have the link. So write to me at rebtdoctor@gmail.com, and during the REBT conversation hour, I will select a volunteer and show them how to cultivate flexible and non-extreme attitudes, even when things are not as they would like them to be in their life, so that they can then change what they can change and live happily with circumstances until they can change them, or if they can change them, to live reasonably well and in an undisturbed state with conditions as they exist. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you on Saturday.